Nobody at Aldergrove Hall expected the quietest voice at the table to be the one that broke everything open. If you had walked the long gravel drive that morning, past the hedges clipped so sharp they looked drawn with a ruler, you would have thought the house of Vreeland was the calmest family in the whole kingdom of Marrow. You would have been wrong. Because by the time the tea had gone cold that afternoon, the Crown Prince had walked out of the room white with anger. An old woman had been publicly insulted in her own home, and a marriage that everyone had smiled about for 3 years was suddenly hanging by a thread. And it all started with a single sentence, spoken by someone who should have known better. Her name was Delia. She had married into the house of Vreeland 3 summers earlier, the daughter of the queen consort from an earlier life, brought into the fold when her mother wed the old king. She was clever, everyone agreed on that. She had a way of talking that made people lean in, a warm laugh, a habit of touching your arm when she wanted you to feel included. For 3 years she had played the part of the grateful newcomer beautifully. But underneath the warmth there had always been something else, something watchful and a little hungry, though nobody at Aldergrove liked to say so out loud. The woman she insulted was Duchess Marin, and to understand why the Crown Prince reacted the way he did, you have to understand who Marin was. She was the old king's sister, 63 years old, with hands roughened by decades of work she never had to do but insisted on doing anyway. She ran the estate's stables herself. She had buried a husband and 2 horses she loved nearly as much, and she had raised half the young royals in that house when their own parents were too busy with duty to notice them growing up. Crown Prince Aldous, the heir, had been one of those children. When his mother died, it was Marin who sat with him through the nights. It was Marin who taught him to ride, to shoot, to keep his back straight when the whole court was watching to see if the boy would cry. He never forgot it. He never would. So when the family gathered at Aldergrove that morning, it was, on the surface, an ordinary thing, a luncheon. Cousins and in-laws and the usual clatter of a large family that only half likes each other. The old king was away at the northern border, which meant Aldous, as heir, sat at the head of the table. Marin sat to his right, as she always did, her gray hair pinned back, her hands folded, saying little and missing nothing. The trouble began with something small, the way these things always do. Someone mentioned the upcoming Founding Day procession, and how Marin would be riding at the front as she had for nearly 40 years. It was tradition. It was hers. And Delia, swirling her glass, smiling that warm smile, said something that landed in the room like a dropped plate. "I do wonder," she said lightly, "whether it isn't time someone younger led the procession. It's a bit sad, isn't it, watching her cling to it? A woman her age, still playing at being the heart of this family, when really she's just the help who married up once and never let anyone forget it." The words hung there. For a second nobody moved. A footman by the wall froze mid-step. One of the younger cousins gave a nervous little laugh and then swallowed it when she saw no one else was laughing. Delia, to her credit or her ruin, did not seem to realize what she had done. She thought she was being witty. She thought, perhaps, that the warmth she had banked over 3 years bought her the right to say hard things and call them jokes. She looked around the table for the smiles she expected. She did not find them. Marin said nothing. She simply looked down at her folded hands, and in that small, quiet motion there was more dignity than in every jewel on Delia's fingers. She had been called the help in the house she had given her whole life to in front of the children she had raised by a girl who had lived there 3 summers. And she chose in that moment not to defend herself. That was Marin. She had never once in her life explained her own worth to anyone because she had never believed she needed to. But Aldous had gone very still. Those who knew him well knew what that stillness meant. He was not a man who shouted. His mother had shouted, and he had spent his childhood flinching, and he had promised himself he would never be that. So when the anger came, it came cold and quiet and absolutely unmistakable. He set down his fork. He looked at Delia across the length of the table, and the whole room seemed to lean away from what was about to happen. "Say it again," he said. Delia's smile flickered. "Aldous, I only meant." "Say it again, the part where you called her the help." The silence stretched. Delia's face began to change, the warmth draining out of it, replaced by the first real understanding of what she had walked into. "It was a joke," she said, and her voice had gone thin. "You're all being terribly serious about a joke." A joke, Aldous stood. He was not a large man, but when he stood the room seemed smaller for it. "Let me tell you about the help. When I was 9 years old and my mother was in the ground 3 days, there was exactly one person in this entire house who came to my room at night because she could hear me crying through the wall. Not my father, not my tutors, not one of the dozens of people paid to care whether I lived or died. Her. He did not point. He did not need to. She taught me to ride the horse that everyone else said would kill me. She sat outside the council chamber for 6 hours the first time I had to speak, because she knew I was frightened, and she wanted me to know that whatever happened, someone in this house loved me anyway. That is the woman you just called the help. Delia had gone very pale. I didn't know all that. No, Aldous said. You didn't, because you never once thought to ask. In 3 years, you never asked her a single question about her own life. You looked at a 63-year-old woman with dirt under her nails, and you decided she was small. You decided she was beneath you. And the terrible thing, Delia, the thing I cannot forgive standing here right now, is that you thought the rest of us would agree. For a moment it looked as though Delia might cry, and some at the table, the softer-hearted cousins, felt the first tug of pity. But then something shifted in her face, something proud and cornered, and she made the mistake that would cost her the most. Perhaps, she said, lifting her chin, the rest of you agree more than you'll admit. You just don't have the courage to say it. Everyone tiptoes around her like she's made of glass. I'm the only one honest enough to. Enough, the word cracked out of him, and then quieter, worse. You are a guest in this house. You have always been a guest in this house, and you have spent 3 years mistaking our kindness for your right. My aunt has never once been a guest here. This is her home. It was her home before you were born, and it will be her home long after you have gone back to wherever it is you imagine yourself so far above us all. The threat in that last sentence was unmistakable, and everyone heard it. It was Marin who finally spoke. She reached up and touched her nephew's sleeve, the same gesture she must have used 1,000 times when he was small and shaking. Aldous, she said gently, sit down. You've said enough and more than enough. Don't say the thing you can't take back. She insulted you in your own home. And I have been insulted before by people far grander than her, and I am still here, and they are mostly not. A small smile touched the corner of her mouth. That is rather the point, isn't it? I don't need you to defend me, my darling. I never have. But I love you for wanting to. The whole room was watching them now, this old woman and the crown prince, and the thing that undid people about it, the thing that the footman by the wall would talk about for years, was how ordinary the love between them looked. Not grand. Not ceremonial. Just a woman calming a boy she had raised, and a man who would have burned the house down for her and was only just managing not to. Aldous sat, but he did not soften, not toward Delia. You'll leave Aldergrove tonight, he said to her, not unkindly, which was somehow worse than if he'd shouted. You'll go back to the townhouse and you'll think, really think, about what kind of person stands in a family's home and reaches for the oldest, kindest member of it and tries to make her small. And then, if you find you have anything resembling an apology in you, a real one, not a performance, you may write to my aunt. She, being a far better person than you deserve, will probably read it. Whether she forgives you is entirely her business, and none of mine. Delia opened her mouth. She closed it again. Whatever she had been about to say, she seemed to understand at last that there was no version of it that would help her. She rose from the table, her chair scraping loud in the silence, and she left the room without another word, and the great doors of Aldergrove closed behind her with a sound like something ending. For a long moment nobody spoke. Then one of the young cousins, the one who had laughed nervously at the start, said in a very small voice, "Is she really going to have to leave?" "That," said Marin, reaching calmly for the teapot as though the last 10 minutes had not happened at all, "is between her and her own conscience. Now, this tea is stone cold, and I refuse to sit here drinking cold tea like we're in mourning. Ring for a fresh pot, would you, dear?" And just like that the storm passed, or seemed to. Because here is the thing about a sentence like the one Delia spoke. It cannot be unspoken. Long after fresh tea was poured, long after the family drifted out into the gardens and pretended the afternoon had recovered itself, the words sat in the house like a stain. The help. Everyone had heard it. Everyone had heard, too, what it revealed, not about Marin, who was exactly who she had always been, but about Delia, who had shown them at last the shape of the thought she had been carrying behind that warm smile for 3 whole years. That evening, Aldous went to find his aunt. She was in the stables, of course, where she always went when her heart was full, running a brush down the flank of the old gray mare she loved. She did not turn when he came in. She had always known his footsteps. "You didn't have to do that," she said, "in front of everyone. You embarrassed her badly." "She embarrassed herself." "She did." A pause. The brush moved in long, steady strokes. But you enjoyed it a little. The defending, be careful of that, Aldous. A man who enjoys being angry on someone else's behalf can talk himself into all sorts of cruelty and call it loyalty. I taught you better. He came and stood beside her, and for a while he said nothing, just watched her work. Were you hurt? He asked finally. By what she said, not the principle of it, were you hurt? Marin's hand paused on the mare's flank, and for just a moment, a single unguarded moment, he saw that yes, of course she had been. 63 years old, and she had stood in her own home and been called small by a child, and it had landed exactly where such things always land, in the tender private place that no amount of dignity ever fully armors. A little, she admitted. Not because I believed her. I've never needed anyone to tell me my own worth. But it's a strange thing, growing old in a place you've given everything to, and wondering just now and then whether anyone still sees you or whether you've become part of the furniture. Something people step around without looking. Aldous took the brush gently from her hand and set it down. And then he did something he had not done since he was a boy. He put his arms around her, this fierce old woman who had raised him, and he held on. I see you, he said into her gray hair. Every single day I see you. And so does everyone in that house who matters, which is everyone except a girl who is right now packing her bags. You are not the furniture. You are the foundation. You are the reason any of us know how to be kind at all. She let herself be held for a moment, just a moment. And then, because she was Marin and had never in her life let a tender scene run on longer than it should, she patted his back briskly and stepped away. Well, she said, blinking hard and pretending she wasn't. That's quite enough of that. If you tell anyone I cried in a stable, I shall deny it to my grave. She picked up the brush again. Now go on, go and be a prince, and Aldous. He turned at the door. Thank you, not for the anger. For the seeing, that's the part that matters. He left her there in the warm dark of the stable, and he walked back up to the great house that she had held together for 40 years with her roughened hands and her unshowy love, and he understood something he would carry for the rest of his life, that the measure of a family is not in its titles or its processions or the sharpness of its hedges. It is in whether the quietest, oldest, kindest voice at the table is protected, or whether it is left alone. And he swore to himself, walking up that gravel drive in the last of the light, that as long as he lived, no one would ever call her small again. Delia did leave that night. She wrote a letter 3 weeks later. Whether it was a real apology or another performance, only Marin ever knew, and Marin, being who she was, never told a soul. But the next founding day, when the procession rode out through the streets of Marrow, it was the old Duchess at the front, straight-backed on her gray mare, exactly where she had always been. And the Crown Prince rode just behind her, close enough to catch her if she fell, which she never did and never would. Because some people are not the help. Some people are the reason the whole house stands. And the wise ones, the ones worth following, are the ones who never, ever forget the difference.